Welcome to the Sports Angle on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Rickelli. We are here in the sports entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. And we have a special episode of the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. We're going to give to you because the 2022 MLB free agency, it has been wild. It's been entertaining. It's been exciting. And there's been so many moves and so many blockbuster announcements that have happened in the MLB world that tonight's show here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, we're going to go over not only every team in MLB, but we're also going to break down, give some grades for all of you on what teams did great in the MLB free agency for the year of 2022 and which teams did absolutely terrible in what their planning was. Now, the format and the way we're going to be doing this in terms of segment is very simple. Here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio with your host, Ian Rickelli, I will be breaking it down division by division. So we will start out with the AL East. Then we'll go over to the AL Central. We'll move over to the AL West. And we're going to do a very similar situation with the National League. Go in with the teams in the NL East, then break down NL Central, and break down NL West. So, how about we start it out? How about we talk about the AL East? Because the American League East has had a lot of moving parts, some transitions that are going on right now in the AL East. And by the way, Thomas, shout out to you. Your Philadelphia Phillies, I'll talk about them later in the show. But the Philadelphia Phillies, you might be surprised, Thomas, what ranking and what grade I would give your Philadelphia Phillies based off of what they did this past off season. Now, the AL East, we're going to start out with the Baltimore Orioles. And the Baltimore Orioles are an interesting situation because the Baltimore Orioles were only a few games out from being in the postseason in 2022. The Baltimore Orioles, who have been in rebuild mode for the past 4 to 5 seasons, they are towards the back end of their rebuild. The Baltimore Orioles are on their way to eventually become a solid team in Major League Baseball to get back to what they were in the early 2010s, mid 2010s. But what have the Baltimore Orioles done this offseason? What was some moves that were made out there in Baltimore that really solidified them this offseason? Well, not only did they add Philadelphia Philly and former Minnesota Twins starting pitcher Kyle Gibson to kind of a team-friendly one-year deal, but they've also added guys like Nomar Mazara, outfielder, to a minor league contract. The Baltimore Orioles have gone out and added some minor names that will add depth to the Baltimore Orioles organization. Now, there's been moves that have been made by Baltimore that you would not see right away, that you would not look at and think that they're blockbuster, they're monumental. But what Baltimore has done in 2022 is build for the future. Them adding Adam Frazier to an $8 million deal for a one-year contract, what that showed out there in Baltimore is that they're signing Adam Frazier so he could be an eventual replacement down the line. Kyle Gibson, they added him to a one-year deal. He will be a veteran pitcher that eventually will be replaced. The moves the Baltimore Orioles have made this past offseason is about replacement. It is about making value of this year while your prospects are still developing. Now, that last line is a reason why the Baltimore Orioles got a B+ from the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio when it comes to the MLB free agency for 2022. The Baltimore Orioles did not have to go out and get a Xander Bogaerts. They did not have to go out and get a Dansby Swanson. They didn't have to go out and get a Carlos Correa. What the Baltimore Orioles did was smart and intelligent, and what Baltimore ended up accomplishing is they added some veteran pieces. They added some players on one-year deals that are not going to backfire and not going to hurt them long-term. And they let go of people like Jordan Lyles, for example, to go down to Kansas City. And Rugnan Odor, you had him on a 1 year. Now he is gone and done and over with. So if you having the number 1 ranked farm system, having 6 top 100 prospects, and number 2 prospect in all of baseball playing out there in Baltimore, will be with them by the end of 2023. That's a huge reason why the Baltimore Orioles are going to get a B+ in the 2022 MLB offseason. They accomplished what they were setting out to do. They are building in the future. They're focusing on their prospects, and they added a few veterans to establish the team and put it together. Now, the next team, however, is controversial. This team here is all about what haven't they done. You know, I listen to the organization. I listen to your fan base. And all you've been doing is complain, complain, and complain. Now, granted, I could just make fun of you for 15 minutes and talk about how your franchise only does complain whenever they don't get their way. But when it comes to your Boston Red Sox, you want to put your general manager, you want to hang him out to dry. When it comes to your Boston Red Sox, you sit there and act like not going out and getting a superstar is boom or bust out there in Boston. That because the Boston Red Sox did not go out and sign Aaron Judge, that this was a terrible offseason. That because the Boston Red Sox did not re-sign Xander Bogaerts, that this was the worst offseason the Boston Red Sox could have had. I beg to differ. I respectfully disagree with that notion. Because the Boston Red Sox, I give them a B-, because the Boston Red Sox had an agenda. They had a reason with the picks that they did this offseason. Them going out and getting a reliever in Chris Martin was a fantastic move. The Boston Red Sox going out and getting a reliever that will be able to set them up in the 7th and 8th inning is solid out there in Boston. Putting him on a 2-year deal, that is a low-risk, high-reward type of deal. Kenley Jansen, he was a former closer of the year. He was excellent out there in Boston, went over to Atlanta, has still been good, but is not as great as it used to be. This is another situation of the Boston Red Sox doing what they needed to do this offseason. Them getting Kenley Jansen, adding Chris Martin, they have made some pieces work. They're not out there to go out and spend $400 million this offseason. That was not their goal. What their goal was is to make moves that could benefit them in the long term. Getting Matt Strum, a relief pitcher, once again, bringing him over and doing that situation is very smart. Having Justin Turner, bringing him over from the Los Angeles Dodgers, was a fantastic move. Yes, you lost JD Martinez. Yes, you have lost players, for example, that haven't lived up to their value yet. But what the Baltimore Orioles did is very similar to what the Boston Red Sox did. You let go of Xander Bogaerts, you let go of Strom, you let go of Martinez, but in replace, you have brought in some players that are going to add to the organization versus taking away. So, Chris Martin, Justin Turner, Kenley Jansen, Mastika Yoshida, they are all fantastic moves in Boston. And I give them a B- because the Boston Red Sox are not championship contenders. Your Boston Red Sox are not going to go all the way this year. Bloom knows that. He's fully aware of that. So they lost Xander and they added some value in return. Now this one, I'm going to love talking about. The next one is your New York Yankees. How about those Bronx Bombers out there in the Bronx? How about those pinstripes? You know, the New York Yankees had one goal, one objective this offseason. Re-sign Aaron Judge at all costs. Bring back the 62 home run king. And the New York Yankees did that splendidly. And they did it with perfection. Bringing back Aaron Judge to be not just your face of the franchise, but bringing back Aaron Judge to be your captain of the New York Yankees was all they needed to do. Any of these other moves I'm going to talk about, that's just a cherry on the top. But re-signing Aaron Judge was objective A, objective B, and objective C. Re-signing Anthony Rizzo to be your first baseman for the next couple of years. That was an amazing move by the New York Yankees. As somebody who loves Chicago, I could say that Anthony Rizzo being brought back to a team, being a team leader, a guy in the locker room that can lead an organization, is valuable. It's also the same New York Yankees team that didn't just bring back Rizzo, it didn't just bring back Judge, but they made two more moves that I actually will give a lot of props to the New York Yankees for doing right. Bringing over Carlos Rodon on a 6-year deal, $27 million per year. The New York Yankees had to get a number 2 pitcher. It was well established the last 2 off seasons that Gerrit Cole is not enough in New York. So they broke out the checkbook, gave him a no-trade clause, and made Carlos Rodon, at only 30 years old, their number 2 pitcher. That means that for the next 5 seasons, the New York Yankees are going to have Gerrit Cole as your number 1. You're going to have Carlos Rodon as your number 2. The Yankees, at least on paper, should be a playoff contender. They should be battling for a wild card spot for the next couple of seasons out there in the Bronx. Because your New York Yankees, they got an A- from me because they achieved almost every obstacle, every objective the New York Yankees set out to do. They knocked it out of the park. Yes, did they go out and lose Andrew Benintendi? Yeah, they did. They lose Jameson Taillon to Chicago Cubs. Yeah, they did. But I don't think the New York Yankees are kind of frowning on losing Andrew Benintendi when they brought back Aaron Judge. I don't think they're going to complain about losing Jameson Taillon when they brought in an upgrade in Carlos Rodon. Plus side is that the New York Yankees have the 5th overall top prospect in all of baseball in shortstop Anthony Volpe. And I will be confident that the New York Yankees are going to have him be called up at some point before the end of 2023. He is too talented, and he has too much raw ability for the New York Yankees to keep him in AAA for any longer. So the New York Yankees getting an A- is an excellent point. You know, when it comes to Boston, like you mentioned, Thomas, they're going to have a lot of money for next year. You know, they've made excellent moves. Same with the New York Yankees. Hey, you know what, Thomas? The New York Yankees made all those moves. They still might not win it all. I'm not saying the New York Yankees will win it all. I'm saying the New York Yankees made enough moves to potentially win it all. Hey, you know what? You say that they still need pitching. All right, give me some more examples of that. Because I actually will flip the script on you. I think the pitching is no longer the problem in New York. As a matter of fact, I believe the pitching is actually the strong suit for the New York Yankees now. You have Anthony Rizzo, you have Aaron Judge, you have Stanton. The problem the Yankees have now, unfortunately, is you don't have enough hitters in your lineup. I respectfully disagree. I think the pitching is no longer the problem with the New York Yankees. They fixed that problem. The major problem is that you lost Matt Carpenter. He went to the San Diego Padres. You have lost a certain amount of talent over the last few years when it comes to talent and people in your organization. So I respectfully disagree. So the New York Yankees got an A-. The Boston Red Sox got a B+. Baltimore Orioles, they got a B-. So let's continue with the rest of the AL East for just a minute. You have the Tampa Bay Rays. And this one's going to be controversial, but you're going to hear me out on this. The Tampa Bay Rays had arguably the best offseason the Tampa Bay Rays have had in a long time. The Tampa Bay Rays organization, who's not normally known for breaking out the checkbook, the Tampa Bay Rays, who are known for letting go of players and moving on from them, they have actually made some moves. Not only did they sign Zach Eflin to a 3-year deal worth $40 million, which is unheard of for the Tampa Bay Rays, but you let go of players that you are going to have to either re-sign down the line, or you let go of players that you knew were eventually going to be surpassed by all the prospects you have in your system. Let's not forget the Tampa Bay Rays, the Durham Bulls, won the AAA National Championship. The Tampa Bay Rays still have one of the best farm systems in all of baseball. They've done that for the last 5 years. Them losing Mike Zunino to Cleveland is a little bit of a loss. But when you understand they have a catcher right behind him that could be filled in, it doesn't make it seem that bad. Ryan Yarbrough going to Kansas City, it's a little bit of a crushing blow, but the Tampa Bay Rays have pitchers in their system that are eventually going to get called up. Corey Kluber not being re-signed. The Tampa Bay Rays build starting pitchers in their farm system. They've been doing that for 15 years. So I give the Tampa Bay Rays an A for this offseason because not only did they spend for the first time in forever, but they lost talent that they knew they could replace with their farm system. And that's what a smart organization does. You know, that's what a smart organization in baseball eventually trickles down to. Is they will find talent in their system and they'll let go of the players that they know they're going to have to replace eventually. And you know what? A B+, that could be commendable. You know, I would understand why you would give them a B+. I give them an A because they achieved exactly what Tampa Bay has always done, and they even added a little bit of money on the back end. The Toronto Blue Jays. Man, when I told people that I thought Toronto could win the AL East next year, they go out and do this offseason, an above-average offseason, because they pretty much nearly nailed it. Signing Chris Bassitt from the New York Mets to add stability to your rotation was smart. Signing a Gold Glove in your outfield and Kevin Kiermaier was a good move. Trading Teoscar Hernandez to free up some space in your outfield was a good move for Toronto because when it comes to Toronto, they already had 4 to 5 outfielders in their system already. The Toronto Blue Jays, unfortunately, had to get rid of Teoscar Hernandez because they have too many good players already in their outfield. So one of them had to be sacrificed, and Teoscar Hernandez was the sacrifice in Toronto. And yes, they lost Ross Stripling to San Francisco, but you brought back Chris Bassitt. You essentially swapped Stripling and Bassitt. This is also Toronto that still has Vlad Guerrero Jr., you still have Bo Bichette, you have Kevin Biggio. There is a lot of talent in Toronto that they have built up the last 4 or 5 years. This is why Toronto, in my opinion, is the most entertaining team in baseball. You have Alejandro Kirk out there at catcher. You have Lourdes Gurriel Jr. out in the outfield. Like I mentioned, George Springer, your big free agent signing from a few years ago. The Toronto Blue Jays get a B because they didn't have many holes they had to fill. But they did fill them, and they did it nearly flawlessly. So Toronto gets a B. Tampa Bay gets an A. The New York Yankees get an A minus. The Baltimore Orioles get a B minus, and the Boston Red Sox get a B plus. That is my grades on the AL East. Now, let me know in the comments down below. Let me know in the chat if you agree or disagree with those grades for the AL East. As we are going to transition over to the AL Central. Hey, Thomas, I actually believe it is because when it comes to Tampa Bay, they are well known for taking flyers on pitchers. Didn't matter if it was Matt Garza. It didn't matter if it was Corey Kluber, who they just not re-signed. The Tampa Bay Rays are well known for bringing in veteran pitchers, for giving pitchers a second chance. Matt Moore, another example, and making them a lot of money after leaving Tampa Bay. So $40 million for Zach Eflin. That's a solid move for Tampa Bay. They needed a number 2 pitcher outside of who they have now, and they did that very well. So moving over to the AL Central, doing our 2022 MLB free agency discussion on the Sports Angle on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. So we will start out with the good old Chicago White Sox. Man, oh man, the Chicago White Sox. I have so much to talk about with you. The Chicago White Sox is going to be one of the harshest critiques I'm going to give on this episode. The Chicago White Sox, I gave you a C, and I'm being generous with my C ranking because what you did is you took a roster that already been built up, by the way. You took a roster that's already been built. You took an organization that has been building off of future and future and future. That is all Chicago White Sox fans have been telling me. I had a mentor who was a Chicago White Sox fan, and he kept praising Gavin Sheets. He kept talking about Eloy Jimenez. He kept talking about Luis Robert. You know, he always talked about Yohan Moncada. Yohan Moncada. But, you know, Chicago White Sox is going to be about the future, right? So then why is it that Chicago White Sox have doubled down so much on the future that they've let go of talent they should have re-signed? Losing Jose Abreu to Houston is a huge deal for Chicago. Jose Abreu had been with the organization for 8+ years by that point. He had been pretty much an AL MVP. He had been your face of the franchise. And you let him go to Houston when honestly you could have matched the deal. You really could have. You could have matched it. You let Jose Abreu go. That's going to backfire on them if Gavin Sheets or if Gavin Sheets undeveloped. If he does not become the guy, if he does not become Frank Thomas 2.0, the Chicago White Sox are going to be having a hole at first base, and Jose Abreu could have filled it if you had re-signed him. That's the first one. And the second is that Vince Velasquez has been a solid, steady pitcher with Chicago White Sox. He's been doing that for a while. Johnny Cueto was a veteran pitcher that you had in your rotation. Okay? He was not flashy. He was not somebody that was going to impress. But what Johnny Cueto did was add stability to your rotation. So that in case, you know, Dylan Cease ended up getting injured, you had Johnny Cueto there. In case Lucas Giolito had a little bit of a fallback or struggled, had a bit of a decline, Johnny Cueto was there. So what do the Chicago White Sox do? They let Vince Velasquez go to Pittsburgh. They don't re-sign Johnny Cueto. And they add Mike Clevinger to replace him. In my nicest way possible, I will say that at best, Mike Clevinger can at least match 2/3 of the productivity that Vince Velasquez has. At worst, Mike Clevinger will get injured once again, and he will miss 2/3 of the season. Mike Clevinger, doesn't matter if it was in Cleveland, didn't matter if it was in San Diego, Mike Clevinger has been injury prone. He's been a guy that misses a certain amount of time. And more importantly, Mike Clevinger has been a guy that doesn't show that raw ability, that raw talent that I believe that he should have. So the Chicago White Sox, I'm giving them a C because this offseason was mediocre at best. You signed Andrew Benintendi from the New York Yankees to be in your outfield. You have Luis Robert. You have Eloy Jimenez. They always start talking about Gavin Sheets, how he's an outfield / first baseman hybrid. You know, the problem that I really have with the new Chicago White Sox is the fact that this is an organization that did not replace the value that has left the Chicago White Sox. So if the Chicago White Sox, I'm giving them a C, it's because I'm being mighty generous about that C. And I'm not even getting started on the fact that they signed Billy Hamilton again. Why are you signing Billy Hamilton besides the fact that he only has one trait? Everybody knows that Billy Hamilton is only there to steal bases and to get on second on a sac fly. That is what Billy Hamilton is known for. In his early 30s, he's been doing this for a decade, and you brought him back. Why? Even though A.J. Pollock, by the way, was in your outfield, and it was only 3 years older than Billy Hamilton, you haven't brought him back either. Moral of the story, Chicago White Sox, I'm really surprised that this offseason didn't end poorly for them. I give them a C, and I'm being mighty generous about the C for the Chicago White Sox. The C is generous on the White Sox. You know what? I agree 100%. I'm being mighty generous with them. They are going backwards. The Chicago White Sox, I believe they are. Chicago White Sox should be competing for the AL Central this year, and I don't even know what they're going to do. The biggest disappointment. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Sean, I appreciate you being here. That was dumb to let him walk. Thought he was going to the Cubs, though. Funny enough, I've done the AL East already. I'm doing the AL Central now, so later in the show, I will talk about your Chicago Cubs because I have a ranking that you probably will agree or disagree with. So stay tuned for that. And, yeah, the Billy Hamilton. Like I said, their signing did not make sense to bring him back again. Now, staying with the AL Central, I talked about Chicago White Sox. Let's move over to the Cleveland Guardians. I'm giving the Cleveland Guardians a C- here because the Cleveland Guardians, this is coming from the Dolan family that, once again, does not like to spend money. They've shed payroll time and time again. So the Dolan family that doesn't like to spend money all of a sudden gives $16 million to one player. They give $16.5 million for Josh Bell, a guy who, frankly, hasn't been great since leaving Pittsburgh. You know, when he was with Pittsburgh, his stats were among the best in baseball for a first baseman. However, those have been 3 or 4 years ago since Josh Bell's been putting up those elite numbers. And with him being in his early 30s, Josh Bell, 2-year deal, $16.5 million. You know, I don't see it being a good move. You added Mike Zunino. You added him to a 1-year deal to replace Austin Hedges. But you also signed somebody else to be a center as well. I really didn't get the logic there. And you didn't bring back Brian Shaw. There's a bunch of moves the Cleveland Guardians did not make that really surprised and stunned your host, Ian Rakelli. So because of that, the Cleveland Guardians get a C-. I will say that they will probably struggle in the AL Central this season. I do not expect much from Cleveland. Now, Detroit. Hey, Detroit, if you're expecting me to be nice to you, if you're expecting Detroit for me to like you like I do with the Detroit Lions, have you lost your freaking mind? No, seriously, the Detroit Tigers are the most disappointing team this offseason. It's not even remotely close. The Detroit Tigers, in my opinion, had the worst offseason in the MLB. So first off, you bring back Matthew Boyd after you got rid of him not even 2 years ago. You haven't brought back Andrew Chafin, who was a solid relief pitcher. You didn't bring him back. You trade Joe Jimenez to Atlanta and didn't get nearly nothing back for him. You lost, Yamir Candelario for nothing. Detroit, I thought you were trying to build for the future. But yet, your prospect and your farm system is among the worst in all of baseball. You're ranked 22nd in the MLB farm system rankings. So you can't build your farm system. Your veterans are about to retire in Miguel Cabrera. You have no future left. And all of the players that were supposed to develop are not developing. And you also signed one of the worst offseason contracts from a few years ago when you brought in Javi Baez and gave him a boatload of money. The Detroit Tigers the past 2 off seasons have been the definition of mediocre, disappointing, and the Detroit Tigers are going to be last in the AL Central once again because the team and the organization does not know how to build a roster. The Detroit Tigers, if Mr. Ilitch was still alive, he would be cursing out every general manager, every organizational member of the Detroit Tigers. Mr. Ilitch, he would be so disappointed in the Detroit Tigers that he would probably fire every single person in that room and try to run it himself. Because the Detroit Tigers the past 2 off seasons have been terrible, have been near trash. So the Detroit Tigers get the worst ranking out of every team on this list. So Detroit Tigers get a D+ from your sports angle on PR Connections Radio. Terrible, awful moves. I don't like what Detroit did. Yeah, absolutely. The Detroit Tigers get a D. I honestly wanted to give them an F. If I wasn't trying to be a nice person, Sean, I would just give him a flat-out F and then yank him off, and yank the Detroit Tigers from being in Major League Baseball. Trade him away for a AAA team. As a matter of fact, Sean, that's what I would love to do. Have the best AAA team take on the Detroit Tigers, and if they win, they get promoted to MLB. Why not do that? Take the Durham Bulls, who won the AAA championship, take the Detroit Tigers, and play a best-of-7 series. And if by some chance the Durham Bulls won, they become an MLB team. Detroit, you get demoted. You have to earn your way back. Because this team is terrible and is a laughingstock. Yeah, Detroit is Pittsburgh 2.0. You're absolutely right, Thomas. So staying with the AL Central, the Kansas City Royals get an A this MLB offseason because the Kansas City Royals had one objective. Your Kansas City Royals had one idea in mind. Do not spend a lot of money and build from within. And based off of that criteria there, and based off of every report that I saw coming out of Kansas City, the Kansas City Royals nailed what they wanted to do. They brought in Jordan Lyles on a 2-year deal. He'll be a middle of the rotation guy. You brought in Ryan Yarbrough on a 1-year deal, $3 million, a low-risk, high-reward deal. Kansas City is building from within. Bobby Witt Jr., Kyle Isbell. The Kansas City Royals know the talent that they have. They've been building it in from the last 4 or 5 MLB drafts. They did not have to do much in terms of building talent. So, Kansas City, they get an A from the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio because they accomplished exactly what they wanted to do, and that was to build from within, sign 1 or 2 pitchers to add some depth, and they are going to continue building from that rebuild as a small market. Hey, you know what, Thomas? Considering how stupid the AL Central is, yeah, sure, why not? The Kansas City Royals will win the 2023 AL Central Division. You know what? Put it on the board. Let's do it. So, moving over to the Minnesota Twins out there in the Twin Cities, they get an A for the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio as well. because the one person they did not re-sign is the best move they could have made. Not re-signing one player has made the Minnesota Twins better as a result. Not re-signing catcher Gary Sanchez has already made Minnesota a better team. All right, I wasn't going to poke fun at Carlos Correa. I could have. But not re-signing Gary Sanchez was a better positive for the Minnesota Twins. All right, Carlos Correa going to San Francisco, Gio Urshela going to Anaheim. Yeah, those are some losses out there in Minnesota, but not re-signing Gary Sanchez actually made the team better in terms of analytics, in terms of on-the-field play. They got better. Bringing in Joey Gallo to strengthen the outfield is good if you're a true outcome hitter. And considering what target field is, it actually might benefit Joey Gallo. And Christian Vasquez, him signing that 3-year deal, $10 million, could actually be a blessing in disguise for Minnesota. So Minnesota, they added some good players. They lost some players that actually made the team better. So Minnesota, they get an A from the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. And the last team that we have to go over, real quick before we get back into the conversation, is the fact that when it comes to the AL Central, does anybody know by any chance how long it's been since the AL Central has won a World Series title? It's actually quite fascinating to find out that the AL Central has the longest drought in terms of winning a World Series title by divisions. The AL East, they won theirs in 2018. The AL West just won theirs in 2022. The NL East just so happened to win their World Series back in 2021. The NL Central, they won theirs in good old 2016. Shout out to Chicago Cubs. And the NL West won in 2020. So this is kind of a trivia question for you. How long has it been since the AL Central, which is Cleveland, which is Chicago, Minnesota, Kansas City, and Detroit, how long has it been since they've won a World Series? Because it is fascinating to your host, Ian Rakelli, that the Kansas City Royals were the last team to do it. That Kansas City in 2015 was the last time the AL Central won. Chicago White Sox was 2005. It's been almost 20 years now. The Minnesota Twins, they haven't won it since forever. They haven't been relevant since the early 1990s. The Detroit Tigers have not won it in a very long time. And the Cleveland Guardians have the longest World Series drought in current MLB. So couldn't we make an argument on this show that the AL Central in baseball is the AFC South in the NFL? And a division that exists to just be in the playoffs only? The AL Central in baseball only exists to be a first-round exit in the American League division. Similar to the AFC South in the NFL, they're going to be eliminated in the wild card. Just some food for thought. Now, we're going to move over to the AL West, doing our 2022 MLB free agency discussion here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, the voice of new media. So, of course, we're going to start out with the World Series champions, the reigning, defending World Series champion, and that is your Houston Astros. Some of you are going to call them the Cheeteros, but they are the Houston Astros. And as a matter of fact, I hate to say this. Man, oh man, I hate to say this. But the Houston Astros are the winners of the MLB offseason. The 2022 MLB offseason was won by your World Series champions. The Houston Astros adding Jose Abreu to replace Yuri Gurriel was a mind-blowing, breathtaking, solid move by Houston. It was all the way out of left field. The Houston Astros bringing in an AL MVP to strengthen their lineup was an amazing move that really was calculated and done right by Houston. Then bringing back Michael Brantley, who I honestly wanted the Cubs to get personally. But bringing back Michael Brantley on a one-year deal, a veteran deal, will take the pressure off Kyle Tucker. Will take some pressure off Yordan Alvarez. The Houston Astros bringing back a reliever in Rafael Montero to be your 6th inning, 7th inning utility man. Bringing him back on a 3-year deal, a team-friendly 3-year deal, might I add. The Houston Astros nailed this 2022 MLB free agency. And with Houston, your Houston Astros, losing Justin Verlander, it looks bad on paper, but then the moment you realize how much they would have had to pay Justin Verlander, how much they would have had to pay for a 39-year-old Justin Verlander on only a 2-year deal, you win that deal. The Justin Verlander situation was actually won by Houston because they didn't have to spend $40 to $45 million on Justin Verlander. They freed up that space and gave $19 million to Jose Abreu. They freed that up and gave $11 million to Rafael Montero. They freed that up and gave $12 million to Michael Brantley. So instead of spending all that money on one player, they took that money and bought 3 for the price of 1. So Houston, you get an A+. You get one of the best grades for the 2022 MLB offseason. I'm a huge fan of what Houston did. And, Sean, you just said it. Their rotation is fine without him. The Houston Astros had 4 pitchers already, excluding Justin Verlander. And they will be fine without Justin. I am so happy the Mets wasted their money on him. He is not worth it, Thomas says. I'm going to talk about those New York Mets in about 10 minutes, Thomas. I know you're really happy to hear me talk about them. So, sticking with the Houston Astros, that was an A+. Excellent move by them. Another team that made some excellent moves was the Anaheim Angels. Now, the Anaheim Angels get an A- from the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio because the Disney team was smart. For the first time ever, maybe because Artie Moreno is trying to sell the team, maybe. But Tyler Anderson, giving him a 3-year deal to go from LA to Anaheim, that was a move that is going to be beneficial for the Anaheim Angels. They've tried so many different pitchers. Dan Herron, Noah Syndergaard, CJ Wilson. There's been so many pitchers that the Anaheim Angels have brought in, and they have failed. So they're going to spin the wheel again, and Tyler Anderson, that's who they're hoping will benefit them. They brought in Brandon Drury on a 3-year deal from San Diego to be their utility guy alongside Anthony Rendon, who I think the Anaheim Angels have finally figured out was not worth the contract Artie Moreno wanted Anthony Rendon to be. Yeah, keep in mind, by the way, Anthony Rendon was only given that deal because Artie Moreno wanted that deal. Nobody else in the organization did. The owner went over their heads. So you bring in Brandon Drury, you bring in Carlos Estevez, you have Tyler Anderson. The Anaheim Angels, for the first time in forever, have actually been complacent. They've actually been solid in an offseason. And if I had to put on my tinfoil hat, I think I know why. I believe I know why the Anaheim Angels did what they did in the 2022 MLB offseason. I believe the Anaheim Angels know that Shohei Ohtani is on his way out. I believe the management and the organization themselves are fully aware of what's going to happen next offseason. The fact that Shohei Ohtani could be wearing pinstripes. Fact that Shohei Ohtani could be wearing Dodger blue. Or maybe Shohei Ohtani could be walking into Wrigleyville and play in Chicago. Because Shohei Ohtani has the ability to leave next offseason in Anaheim. So all these moves that Anaheim did in 2022, I think is a precursor and is a predetermined of what's going to happen in 2023. Hey, hopefully I'm wrong on that because Shohei Ohtani is one of my favorite players to watch in baseball. However, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the reason why the Angels doubled down on pitching this offseason. And you know what, Thomas? You are a very bold man. The Anaheim Angels will make it to the playoffs this year. Yeah, you're bold, man. You're very bold. I'll give you that. Hey, Thomas. Shohei Ohtani, Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, Trey Turner. Are you sure you're not playing MLB The Show? Hey, Shohei Ohtani's being wasted. Mike Trout's being wasted. I know there's certain players on the Anaheim Angels that probably are wasted right now. But that's besides the point. When it comes to Anaheim, they are all being wasted in terms of talent. Now, staying off the Anaheim Angels, let's move over real quick to the soon-to-be Oakland Athletics. How about the team that's going to move to Las Vegas in a few years? Because the Oakland Athletics, they get an A. Now, the Oakland Athletics get an A because you have to understand what the Oakland Athletics set out to do. The Oakland Athletics and the Fisher family, they do not spend money. They do not go out and buy superstars. When you comprehend that the Oakland Athletics have never been and never will be an organization that goes and spends $150 million in a single off season, that makes you understand and comprehend why they get an A here. They traded Sean Murphy for not just 4 top prospects, one of them being a number 1 prospect, but they brought in a catcher that's only going to cost them $4.5 million. It saved the Fisher family money in Manny Pena. They signed Adolis Diaz on a 2-year deal because it saves them money. They brought in Jace Peterson on a 2-year deal because that deal is going to save them money that they saved by getting rid of Matt Chapman the offseason prior. Just like Diaz was brought on that 2-year deal because they got rid of Elvis Andrus and his terrible contract they put on the Chicago White Sox. So the Oakland Athletics get an A here on Sports Angle because they achieved 1,000% what they set out to do. The Oakland Athletics wanted to shed payroll. They want to shed salary. They want to simply suck in Oakland. They do not want to be successful at Oco. What they want to do is be so terrible in Oakland that when they move to Las Vegas, people in Oakland will stop caring about Oakland. Now, is that a very shady thing to do? Yeah, absolutely. Is it a slimy SOB move to pretty much turn your fan base against you? Yes, it is. But is that 1,000% what they're doing? Is that what the Fisher family wants? You're dang right it is. So the Oakland Athletics get an A because they are achieving what they want. So your 2025 Las Vegas Athletics, get ready for it because this team is going to suck so badly this year. Not only do I think they're going to lose 111 games, but they will announce the move to Las Vegas halfway through the year. And they will trade Paul Blackburn. They will trade any all-star they have left on the organization because they are focused on coming to Vegas and they are focused on getting rid of any talent they have left while they're in Oakland. So after that's over, getting over to the other teams in the AL West, we have the Seattle Mariners. And the Seattle Mariners, a team that just made it to the postseason for the first time in 2 decades. They hit a home run here. The Seattle Mariners get an A from the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio because they added a superstar in the making, and Teoscar Hernandez. And all they had to do to get Teoscar Hernandez was 2 pitchers. And these 2 pitchers are not going to become superstars. They're not going to become generational talents. No, these were 2 pitchers that are going to add depth to Toronto. Toronto got depth, and Seattle got a future superstar in Teoscar Hernandez. Anyone who watched Toronto the past few seasons would know that Teoscar Hernandez was a highlight reel out there in Toronto. So you added Teoscar Hernandez. You shipped out the 2020 AL Rookie of the Year in Kyle Lewis, who was floundering in AAA Tacoma towards the end of last year. And you brought in a catcher in Cooper Hummel, who will add some more depth to the backstop in Seattle. You trade Jesse Winker to Milwaukee, but instead you bring in a very valuable piece in Colton Wong. You have a situation where the Seattle Mariners did a very smart move by getting rid of a guy who's kind of a big name, a former All-Star in Jesse Winker, and you bring back somebody else that is going to provide value for the organization. Mitch Haniger is an unfortunate loss for Seattle, but it was a necessary one because of the fact that Julio Rodriguez has become your staple now. You sign him to that amazing contract extension. Mitch Haniger became, unfortunately, a part that you could pawn off. Mitch Haniger became a player that you could discard because you had somebody better. So Seattle gets an A from the Sports Angle on PRConnectionsRadio.com, and when it comes to what they did this offseason. And the Texas Rangers, oh boy, the Texas Rangers out there in Arlington. The situation with the Texas Rangers, they get an A+. Because not only did the Texas Rangers build their rotation, but the Texas Rangers played MLB The Show Simulator and essentially did what anybody who loads up MLB The Show would do. Anybody who's ever played franchise mode, anybody who's played My GM, you sign as many pitchers as possible, right? You go in, you become the general manager, and you sign as many top-tier pitchers as possible. You try to add as many 80 or 85 overall pitchers to your rotation. So what did the Texas Rangers do? They gave Jacob deGrom $185 million. That could be a high-risk, high-reward deal out there in Texas. Andrew Heaney in his early 30s. Yeah, you give him a 2-year deal. Why not? We have the money for it. Martin Perez, re-signed him to a 1-year deal. You know what? We're going to give him $19.5 million because we are spending money like a drunken sailor. The Texas Rangers doing what they did was go in, get a quality of pitchers because we signed a bunch of infielders the last offseason, which is what they did. They got Simeon. They got Seager. They got so many guys the offseason prior that were hitters. This offseason, they overload on pitchers. So fantastic move. Texas Rangers get an A+ alongside the Houston Astros. As a matter of fact, they are the two teams in the AL side that get an A+ here on Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. So to recap, before we move over to the National League, here's the recap for all the American League teams and their grades. Baltimore Orioles got a B+. I love what they did. They brought in some veterans, and they have the number 1 ranked farm system that they are banking on to get them in the postseason. Boston Red Sox get a B-. They added stability at the relief. They brought in this talented Japanese outfielder, and they didn't overspend on Xander Bogaerts. Chicago White Sox get a C. It was average. They stripped away their best players, and they got worse instead of getting better. Cleveland Guardians get a C-. An organization that doesn't spend money, overspends on a first baseman. Detroit Tigers get the worst ranking out of everybody. They get a D+. They made 5 steps backwards, and they only made half a step forward. Houston Astros were the winner of the 2022 MLB offseason. Them getting an AL MVP to strengthen their lineup after winning a World Series was amazing for them. Kansas City Royals get an A. They add 2 pitchers. They have some veterans, and they have that young up-and-coming youth that is being brought in to Kansas City. Anaheim gets an A-. They added some pitching, and this is an organization that might be losing Shohei Ohtani next year, so they're building up the rest of the team in case that happens. Minnesota Twins get an A. They lost Carlos Correa. They lost Gary Sanchez. And they made a good move by bringing in Christian Vasquez and Joey Gallo. They made some positive strides. The New York Yankees get an A-. They did exactly what they wanted to do. They brought back Aaron Judge. They brought back Anthony Rizzo. And they brought in Carlos Rodon to be a big upgrade over Jameson Taillon. The Oakland Athletics wanted to shed salary and dump payroll. They did that this offseason. They get an A. Seattle Mariners get an A. They got a superstar in the making in Teoscar Hernandez to solidify their outfield alongside Julio Rodriguez, and they've actually added and made some good positive moves. Tampa Bay Rays. Tampa Bay Rays get an A. They brought in Zach Eflin on a very good 3-year deal. An organization that doesn't really spend money, actually spent money this time and broke out the paycheck. And for the 4 players that they lost, they have young guys in their farm system right now that are in AAA that will get called up to replace the talent that they lost. So they actually are looking forward to young players instead of buying for older players. Texas Rangers get an A+. They bought a bunch of pitchers to solidify their infield that they bought the past offseason. And the Toronto Blue Jays get a B because the Toronto Blue Jays, they made one advantage, and that was replacing Ross Stripling and getting an upgrade in Chris Bassett. The AL East here on 2022 MLB free agency discussion. Let's start out with those Atlanta Braves, huh? Let's start with the Atlanta Braves organization, the team that made it to the World Series in 2021, the team that has been the most recent organization to win a World Series in the NL East, and they nailed it. Man, oh man, did the Atlanta Braves nail this offseason. Getting a Gold Glove catcher, getting someone who's going to be an all-star and be a face of your franchise for the next 5 or 6 years in Sean Murphy. Yes, you had to sacrifice your number 1 prospect, but you're banking on Sean Murphy being your guy for the next 5 years. Fantastic move by the Atlanta Braves. You also bring in a relief pitcher in Nick Anderson to strengthen your bullpen and to actually be a replacement for Kenley Jansen, who actually was a little bit underwhelming when you brought him over from the LA Dodgers. You brought back Jesse Chavez as a reliever. You have made some solid moves like bringing back Brooks Wilson to solidify your bullpen. Now, there are going to be people who are going to talk about the Dansby Swanson idea. There's going to be people who are going to be bashing the Atlanta Braves for losing their captain and their leader in the locker room in Dansby. But has anybody noticed that the Atlanta Braves normally don't let go somebody unless they know someone's right behind them? Has anybody else picked up on the fact that the Atlanta Braves organization is well established for not letting go of young superstars unless they are confident in their organization to go out and get somebody that's exactly like the guy they're replacing? And with the fact that they have 11 players signed to long-term deals out there in Atlanta, somebody tells me that them letting go of Dansby was done by design. That was not unintentional. That was not accidental. No, the Atlanta Braves did that on purpose because they know that their roster is good enough to get an organization. No, they did not. They did not trade an all-star catcher too. When it comes to the Atlanta Braves, they actually made a smart, positive move by adding an all-star catcher, adding somebody who's going to be your face of the backstop for the next 5 years. So Atlanta Braves get an A+ from the Sports Angle on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. Hey, Thomas, I told you I was going to get to this point, and now I officially have. We're going to talk about the New York Mets. We're going to talk about the team out there in Queens, and unfortunately, I don't have enough of a banner to go through every single move the New York Mets did. This New York Mets team made so many moves that I don't have a long enough banner. I'm going to have to read them out here on the show. Because not only did they sign Justin Verlander, the 2022 AL Cy Young Award winner, and gave him $43 million a year out there in New York, but this is also the same organization that re-signed Brandon Nimmo to an 8-year deal, $20 million per year. They re-signed Timmy Trumpet Man, Edwin Diaz, to be their closer, 5-year deal, $20 million per year. They brought in Jose Quintana on a 2-year deal, $13 million per year, to bring him over from St. Louis. They re-signed Adam Ottavino to be in their bullpen for 2 more years. They brought in David Robertson on a $10 million deal from the Philadelphia Phillies. And they also made a smart move by letting go of certain players. Seth Lugo, you're in San Diego now. Goodbye. Chris Bassett, you know what? We have Justin Verlander now. We don't need you. Go to Toronto. Tajon Walker, hey, we don't want to give you a 4-year deal. Go to our division rival. You go play in Philadelphia now. The New York Mets organization is doing what they did, what Steve Cohen promised he was going to do. Steve Cohen told people of the New York Mets back when he bought the team that I am going to bring the New York Mets a championship. Everybody remember that? Everybody remember that Steve Cohen promised people that he was going to bring a championship to Queens and he was going to do whatever it took to win a championship. Sure enough, 3 off seasons later, and probably $1 billion later, Steve Cohen is banking on his promise. Steve Cohen is doing what most MLB owners don't have the balls to do, and that is to spend his own money, put his money where his mouth is, and that is bring in talent after talent after talent to New York Mets. Now, will this guarantee a championship in Queens? Probably not. They probably will not win a championship, as long as he is spending money. However, I appreciate his dedication to win a championship. I appreciate the fact that Steve Cohen took over from the Wilpon family took over from the Bernie Madoff era of the New York Mets and has now put his money where his mouth is and has spent $350 million payroll later on the New York Mets. So an A+ with the New York Mets organization. Hey, yeah, Sean, the Mets opened the vault. You want to know somebody else who opened the vault, Sean? You want to know somebody else that did a fantastic job this offseason? I'm talking about Thomas's team here. I'm talking about your Philadelphia Phillies. The Philadelphia Phillies get an A- from the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio because you added Trey Turner on an 11-year contract. Not only do the Philadelphia Phillies add Taijuan Walker, who, by the way, is going to be a staple of your rotation now, but this is the Philadelphia Phillies that just made it to the World Series. This is a Philadelphia Phillies team that on paper was already good enough to make it to a World Series. They didn't have to make as many moves as they did to go back to a World Series, but they did. Bringing in Matt Strum to be your relief pitcher, to be a guy in your bullpen as a utility guy, only $7.5 million. That was a smart financial move by the Philadelphia Phillies. Letting go of Zach Eflin and replacing him with Taijuan Walker, that could be a smart move long term. And losing Noah Syndergaard, losing Kyle Gibson, losing David Robertson, yeah, that sounds tough on paper, but let's not forget that the Philadelphia Phillies have a bunch of talent in their farm system still. And it's the same Philadelphia Phillies that have pitching in the works. So Philadelphia Phillies get an A-. I love the Trey Turner move. I believe they have a bright future ahead of them. And the final team in the AL and the NL East is the Washington Nationals. And I give the Washington Nationals an A+ because they achieved exactly what they said they were going to do. That last comment right there on that banner defines why I gave them an A+. The Washington Nationals have fully committed to a rebuild. They have let go of majority of their talent that won that World Series in 2019. You don't have Juan Soto. You don't have Josh Bell. You do not have Bryce Harper anymore. This is a Washington Nationals team that has Steven Strasburg and I think Victor Robles. And that's pretty much it. Everybody else for that 2019 team is long, and I mean long, gone from Washington. So the Washington Nationals have started their full rebuild. They added some veterans like Trevor Williams and Jeimer Candelario. But the Washington Nationals are very good at committing to a rebuild. I'm happy to hear that the Washington Nationals are fully starting on that now. So I give the Washington Nationals a A+ for fully committing to a rebuild, not making any spectacular moves, and are shedding salary to prepare for a rebuild. So that's the NL East. Let's move over to the NL Central, doing our 2022 MLB free agency discussion on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. Hey, Sean, I told you I was going to talk about your team at one point. Well, here it is. Here's the Chicago Cubs. Let's talk about it. I give the Chicago Cubs a C because, frankly, I'm not a fan of one particular move that the Chicago Cubs made. There is one move that made me kind of steer away from giving the Cubs a B, giving them a B-. But there's just one move that I can't give praise to with the Chicago Cubs organization. And, by the way, here's our announcement. PR Connections. We are so glad that you're enjoying Sports Angle at PRConnectionsRadio.com. Please subscribe to our channel and give the show a thumbs up. Now, look, Sean, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Am I a fan of the fact that the Chicago Cubs did not go out and sign Aaron Judge for a 15-year deal. Yes, I'm happy to hear about that. Am I happy about the fact that Jason Hayward is now with the Los Angeles Dodgers? He signed to a minor league contract. Good for him. But the problem I have with the Chicago Cubs is that you had to go out and you had to sign Dansby. Out of all the shortstops you could have gotten, out of all the people that you could have added to the Chicago Cubs, you had Xander Bogaerts. Xander Bogaerts could have been a good player for the Chicago Cubs. He goes to the San Diego Padres. Hey, you know what? You didn't get him. How about Carlos Correa? No, he goes to San Francisco. You know what? Trey Turner. Trey Turner could be an amazing player for the Chicago Cubs. No, he goes to Philadelphia. It really felt like the Chicago Cubs took the bottom of the tier list when it came to shortstops. Like, it felt like at the shortstop tier, option A was shut down. They went to option B. That was shut down. They went to option C. That was shut down. Then they finally ended on option D. That's really what it felt like. It really felt like the Chicago Cubs organization settled. You know, they really settled on the fact that you're not going to get Xander Bogaerts to play at third base, so he's going to go play for San Diego. Carlos Correa could have been a good, interesting option. However, he did not end up going there. He goes all the way to San Francisco. So it really felt like a letdown when it was announced that Dansby was added to the Chicago Cubs organization. You know, obviously this is a opinion piece, and this is based off of my perception. But no, I'm not a fan of the whole Dansby situation. You know, I understand that he could be a leader in the locker room. You know, he was a captain, out there in Atlanta. Him and Freddie Freeman were the two guys that held the locker room together in Chicago. But I'm just not a fan of the deal. Also, Cody Bellinger. I will say this. Adding him to a one-year deal is not bad. It was not a bad deal to give Cody Bellinger a one-year tryout, pretty much. Jameson Taillon on a 4-year deal. We saw him play in Pittsburgh. We know who he's about. We know that when Jameson Taillon could play a full 162-game season, he's a good deal. And, by the way, Sean, you say that it's time for Wilson to move on. I absolutely agree. As somebody who has grown up watching Chicago, Wilson Contreras is always going to be remembered as a Chicago Cub. All right? He is always going to be remembered as a legend on that 2016 World Series champion. So, yeah, it was time for him to move on, get his big contract someplace else. No problem with that. It's just Dansby. It's just the one problem I had. So, I gave the Chicago Cubs a C, not because of Bellinger, not because of Taillon, not even because of Boxberger, who, by the way, could be a guy to use as a utility guy, 7th inning, 8th inning player in the bullpen. It's just a Dansby situation. That's all. So, that is my situation with Chicago Cubs. Hey, you know what? I could be 1,000% wrong. I hope I'm 100% wrong. But Dansby, it is a situation where I knocked it down from a B to a C because of that deal. Felt like they could have gotten somebody better, essentially was my point. So, continuing with the NL Central, Cincinnati Reds, you get a C-. You really did not accomplish anything this offseason. As a matter of fact, the Cincinnati Reds made so little moves that I had to include a minor league deal and a swap of a minor league outfielder for the Cincinnati Reds. That is how lack of production and lack of moves the Cincinnati Reds made. So, Cincinnati, because of the fact you really didn't do much, here's your C-. Go on and take it. Maybe you'll do something next offseason. So, we talked about Chicago. We talked about Cincinnati. Let's go over to Milwaukee because you're going to get an A- here. Jesse Winker and Abraham Toro, getting them from Seattle. And getting a catcher in William Contreras, the younger brother of Wilson Contreras. The Milwaukee Brewers in one offseason just made this team better in making 2 moves. All it took for Milwaukee to become a playoff contender again is make 2 moves. Jesse Winker could have some resurgence in Milwaukee. Abraham Toro is a utility guy and a very underrated utility guy in Houston and Seattle, who do the same in Milwaukee. And William Contreras is not even in his prime yet, so maybe he could be a version of what his brother was in Chicago. So I love this move. I'm happy for Milwaukee, ironically, and I think the Milwaukee Brewers have had a fantastic offseason, so give me an A-. Yeah, they trade him away. You're absolutely right. The Atlanta Braves traded away William Contreras. But you know what? I understand why. Sean Murphy, 2 years, I believe, more time than William Contreras did. So they pretty much swapped Contreras for Murphy. That was the situation they did. So Milwaukee, I give them an A-. The final 2 teams in the NL Central. The Pittsburgh Pirates, I give them a B+. It really feels like the Pittsburgh Pirates, for the first time in about 9 years now, actually had a purpose this offseason. The Pittsburgh Pirates, for the first time in forever, actually went out and had a goal in place this offseason out there in Pittsburgh. Vince Velasquez, being him from Chicago, was a fantastic move. I love the fact they put him in the rotation. You brought over Carlos Santana, a veteran first baseman, to pretty much be a stopgap for who's going to come up next. So you brought him in. That's a solid move. You brought in Austin Hedges at 30 years old to be your catcher that is going to be a stopgap for the guy you have after him. Who's the person that's going to come in after Austin Hedges? Oh, just their top prospect in the 2021 first overall pick, catcher Henry Davis. For anybody who did not watch the highlights and for anybody who has not seen the minor league reel that Henry Davis has, when he eventually gets called up from Pittsburgh, expect him to take over Major League Baseball. Henry Davis and Adley Rutschman are going to be 2 of the future top catchers in baseball. I'm calling it right here, right now. Adley Rutschman and Henry Davis are the future at the backstop position. And Pittsburgh just so happens to have lucked into getting that first overall pick in 2021, and they have him in their farm system. Watch out for Pittsburgh. And then the St. Louis Cardinals. St. Louis Cardinals, Wilson Contreras was the best part about it. Wilson Contreras was the best part of your offseason. The rest of it, though, very disappointing. St. Louis Cardinals, they really needed to go out and make more moves this offseason, and they pretty much did Wilson Contreras, and that's it. Yadier Molina, he's retired. He's not coming back. Albert Pujols, he's retired. He's not coming back. You lost Jose Quintana to New York Mets. You didn't sign a pitcher after him. Literally, the St. Louis Cardinals made 1 move, and that's it. You brought in Wilson Contreras, and you signed Oscar Mercado to a minor league deal. So, because of the lack of moves that were made, that's why I give him a C. Wilson Contreras is an A, but because they didn't do much, I give the St. Louis Cardinals a C when it comes to their offseason. They didn't do enough. That's simply all I'm saying. And let's move over to the NL West. So, by the way, Sean, you brought up an excellent point. Yeah, Wilson Contreras will out-hit Yadier Molina because pitchers posted an ERA over 1 point higher with Willie behind the plate. Yeah, so when you have, Jack Flaherty, and you have Carlos Martinez, and you have the guys that are currently pitching like Jordan Montgomery out there in St. Louis, just be aware of that statistic. So, doing our 2022 MLB free agent discussion here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. Let's get to the last one. Let's talk about the NL West, shall we? Now, this one's going to be controversial, but I have to explain once again why I give the Arizona Diamondbacks an A-. The Arizona Diamondbacks are not a winning team at the moment. The Arizona Diamondbacks are not ready to be a playoff team yet. But what the Arizona Diamondbacks did was take flyers on guys who are low risk, high reward situations. Bringing in a 2020 AL Rookie of the Year, which is a low risk situation, they only had to give up a catcher and Cooper Hummel, is a low risk, high reward situation. Bringing over a Yankees relief pitcher and Miguel Castro to replace Mark Melancon, once again, low risk, high reward. So the Arizona Diamondbacks, they didn't do anything flashy. They didn't go out and sign a big name. But what they did is they did low risk, high reward, and that's what I think Arizona is going for. And it's also the same Arizona Diamondbacks that have the third best prospect in all of baseball in Corbin Carroll. You also have Drew Jones, the son of Andrew Jones, that's eventually in their prospect as well. So the Arizona Diamondbacks having that 1-2 punch in terms of prospects, that's what they're banking on. I think Arizona is going to be just fine based off of this offseason. You have to then transition over to Colorado. Look, Colorado, I'm going to give you a C+ simply because you at least made an effort. All right, none of these moves that I'm going to put on the screen are going to impress you in any way. All right, former Cub reliever Pierre Johnson. Ooh, that's a big name. Re-signing Jose Urena on a 1-year deal. Ooh, hope he doesn't run into Ronald Acuna Jr. in Colorado. Like, the problem with the Colorado Rockies is that at least they made an attempt this offseason. So I'm going to give them that plus there because he at least made an attempt. But besides that, Colorado Rockies, you really didn't do much in terms of value. You didn't do much in terms of actually making your team better. So Colorado, you get a C+ because you at least put in an effort. The next team is the Los Angeles Dodgers, and I give this team an A- because the Los Angeles Dodgers did exactly what they wanted to do. A lot of people forget that, yes, they re-signed Clayton Kershaw, who is still the captain and the leader in the locker room. They brought him back. You brought in Noah Syndergaard on a 1-year deal that will not affect you long term. If he flames out, they'll bring in a starting pitcher from the minors. If Noah Syndergaard doesn't pan out, they will go to the trade deadline and they will trade for a starting pitcher. If JD Martinez doesn't pan out, you know what? They have a designated hitter down the line. They will replace him as well. That is how the Los Angeles Dodgers work. The Dodgers system is built like a conveyor belt. The Dodgers, they build that organization and that roster like it is a well-oiled machine. And the only reason why you can tell is based off of that last comment I have on the banner. The Los Angeles Dodgers, despite the fact they won over 110 games last year, have the number 2 ranked farm system in all of baseball. If it wasn't for Baltimore, they would be number 1. The Los Angeles Dodgers also have a record 7 top 100 prospects in their system. So if Clayton Kershaw eventually runs out of juice, they have a young 19-year-old cannon that they could bring up. Noah Syndergaard doesn't pan out, they have a 21-year-old southpaw they can bring up. JD Martinez doesn't pan out, you know what? We have this outfielder in AAA. We'll call him up. The Los Angeles Dodgers, they didn't do much in terms of a big name like Aaron Judge. They didn't have to. The Los Angeles Dodgers did not need to go out and get a big name because they have the second best farm system in all of baseball. 7 top 100 prospects. They're going to be fine. Exactly. I mean, that's pretty much the point. You know, the point is that the Los Angeles Dodgers, you know what? If they sign a bad contract, they'll just shrug it off and call up somebody from Oklahoma City. If somebody doesn't pan out, you know what? They will sit somebody down, call them up from Tulsa, and they'll be on the Dodgers on Tuesday. That is what the Dodgers organization does. Now, I saved the last two for last. I saved these last two teams, the best for last. San Diego Padres, you've added Xander Bogaerts on an 11-year deal. Xander Bogaerts being added to San Diego, that is a good move. That is a really solid move because of the fact that that you had to do something to add to that lineup. That NLCS showed that San Diego was weak in the middle. The San Diego Padres in that playoff had deja vu from what happened 2 playoffs a year ago. So you added Xander Bogaerts, you bring back Nick Martinez, you bring back Robert Suarez. You re-sign all these guys like Contreras to be your starting pitcher, that 23-year-old. That was a smart move. So the San Diego Padres, they did some really good moves, some very smart moves, like bringing in Seth Lugo and Matt Carpenter. So the San Diego Padres, I give them an A-. They did some very well problems, and they really took care of it in San Diego. And the last one is San Francisco Giants. They get an A. You added Carlos Correa. You added Mitch Haniger. You added Ross Stripling. You brought back Jock Peterson. But you lost the Aaron Judge sweepstakes. Everybody is not going to let that go. The fact that Aaron Judge for 10 minutes was a San Francisco Giant. That, I was at work and I was talking to a coworker of mine. And I was like, hey man, he's out the San Francisco Giants. We were talking about it. It was a big deal. I'm driving on my way home from work. I'm driving around. I'm just, playing it cool. I drive in. I pull up. I take the key out of the ignition. I get a notification. Aaron Judge is now a New York Yankee. I mean, it was seriously that quick. It went from, hey, Aaron Judge is confirmed. He's going to be a Giant. To, I'm going to pull into my driveway. And all of a sudden, oh, he's no longer a San Francisco Giant. I mean, that's seriously how bad that situation was in San Francisco. The fact that you had a guy that went on Twitter, a official reporter, and he announced that the Giants had Aaron Judge, and then the next day, in the next few minutes, he is a New York Yankee. So the San Francisco Giants did great on almost every front except lose the Aaron Judge sweepstakes that so many people assumed the Giants were going to get. And yes, I will admit, your host Ian Rickelli assumed that the Aaron Judge sweepstakes was going to land in San Francisco. The Giants postponed an introductory press conference with free agent shortstop Carlos Correa after a medical concern. Hey, you know what? If that ends up happening, hey, you know what, Sean? I'm actually going to level with you. If Carlos Correa does not go to San Francisco, I will give it an A+. I will give the San Francisco Giants an A+ if Carlos Correa does not go there. Because Carlos Correa is a solid shortstop, is a really solid shortstop. But no one's going to deny the fact that 13-year deal was a little bit too much. Just a tad overbit. So I'm going to give that an A+. If Carlos Correa does not go there, it weighed just a little bit down. So I will say, San Francisco, you get an A. So very quickly, and yeah, absolutely, you agree with me 1,000%. Of course you do. So I will say on the National League side, here's the recap. Arizona Diamondbacks, A-. They are building towards the future. They added some guys who are low risk, high reward. Atlanta Braves, they get an A+. You get an all-star and a future face of your franchise in Sean Murphy, and you really didn't have to give up much to get him. Chicago Cubs get a C. I like Cody Bellinger. I like Jameson Taillon. Dansby Swanson, not so much. Cincinnati Reds, C-. Underwhelming. You barely did anything of note. Colorado Rockies got a C+. At least you tried, so I'm going to give you a participation trophy. Los Angeles Dodgers, you got an A-. You lost some players. You signed in some players, but you still have a fantastic farm system. That will go a long way. Miami Marlins, I gave you an A+ because you went out and you didn't spend a lot of money, and you're still rebuilding for the future. Milwaukee Brewers, I gave you an A-. This was a fantastic offseason for Milwaukee, and they'll be a playoff contender once again. New York Mets, they got an A+ here. Adding Justin Verlander, adding 7,000 new players to your team. Steve Cohen, he wants to win a championship, and he will buy one before he stops trying. Philadelphia Phillies, I give them an A-. Did a solid move. Trey Turner was fantastic. And adding Tajon Walker. Philadelphia, they did a solid offseason. Pittsburgh Pirates get a B+. I like Velasquez. They brought in some guys like Carlos Santana, and they do have that number 1 overall pick from 2021. He's waiting in the wings. San Diego Padres get an A-. Xander Bogaerts is a solid deal. You still have Fernando Tatis Jr., and you strengthen the lineup by bringing in certain members. San Francisco gets an A. I like Mitch Haniger. Ross Stripling's a good move. Bringing back Jock Peterson, but you lost the Aaron Judge sweepstakes, and there's the concern about Carlos Correa. St. Louis Cardinals, Wilson Contreras was a fantastic move, but it was literally the only move you did. You lost more talent than you brought in this offseason. You get a C. And the Washington Nationals get an A+ because they're committing to a full rebuild, and they are sticking to a full rebuild. So that was our 2022 MLB free agency conversation here on the Sports Angle on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Rickelli. We have a fantastic episode planned for you on Fridays at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. This was a special episode for all of you, talking about the 2022 MLB free agency. So if you want to watch the NFL Week 16 picks, we're going to be doing with Joshua Bailey from Stay Tuned Live. We'll be doing that on Friday night at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. So until then, I'm your host, Ian Rickelli. This was a fantastic show. And until next time, have a good one. And alrighty now.